For most of my life, I struggled with procrastination. I wasn't lazy or incapable, but somehow even the simplest tasks became mountains in my mind. I'd put off doing the dishes until the sink overflowed, ignore unread emails until they became unmanageable, and delay cleaning my room for days, sometimes weeks, until the clutter overwhelmed me. It wasn't that I didn't care, I just couldn't start. I would tell myself, I'll do it later, or I'll wait until I'm in the mood. But the mood never came, and while I waited, the anxiety grew. The longer I delayed, the more paralyzed I felt. Tasks that might have taken 5 minutes felt like they would steal hours from me. I blamed myself constantly. I thought I lacked discipline. I envied people who seemed naturally productive, the ones who could effortlessly move from task to task. I didn't realize that the real problem wasn't ability, it was activation. I didn't need more motivation. I needed a way to begin. Then one night, something shifted. I was standing in my room, staring at the usual mess: unfolded clothes, unopened mail, an unmade bed, papers scattered across my desk. I was exhausted and disappointed in myself. Again. But this time, I didn't try to convince myself to clean the whole room. Instead, I said quietly, just 7 minutes. I don't know why I said that number. Maybe it felt small enough to be manageable. It wasn't 10 minutes, which still sounded like effort. It wasn't 5, which felt too short to count. 7 minutes. That's all. I pulled out my phone, set the timer, and started folding clothes. At first, I moved slowly. I was still resisting it. But by minute 2, something happened. I had entered a rhythm. I wasn't thinking about the timer anymore. I was just cleaning. The resistance faded. When the timer rang, I had already cleared half the floor. I was in the flow. I didn't stop. I kept cleaning. 10 more minutes passed. Then another 10. Before I knew it, my room was clean, and I felt lighter. Not just because of the space, but because I had done something I hadn't done in a long time. I had taken action. That night, I discovered what I now call the 7-minute rule. It's simple. If something feels overwhelming or too big to handle, you commit to doing it for just 7 minutes. Not finishing it, not doing it well. Just showing up for a short, defined burst of time. The beauty of this rule is that it bypasses the mental barriers that stop us from starting. 7 minutes is short enough to feel safe. It tricks your brain into thinking, this won't be so bad. And once you begin, you often find that you want to keep going. But even if you don't, even if you stop exactly at 7 minutes, you still win. Because you started. You kept the promise. You overcame inertia. In the days that followed, I started applying the rule to everything. 7 minutes to write, 7 minutes to sort paperwork, 7 minutes to stretch, 7 minutes to read. Some sessions turned into longer efforts, others didn't. But it didn't matter. I had shown up. And with each repetition, I started to rebuild something I hadn't had in a long time. Self-trust. That may sound like a small thing, but it isn't. When you've spent years avoiding things and disappointing yourself, it's hard to believe your own promises. But every time I honored that 7-minute commitment, I reinforced a new identity. Not of someone who avoids, but of someone who acts. That identity grew stronger with each repetition. 7 minutes at a time, I was becoming someone different. I also realized something important. Most of the pain isn't in doing the task. It's in avoiding it. The dread, the guilt, the mental exhaustion, they come from postponement, not action. But when you act, even briefly, you gain momentum. You break the spell. You feel a little more in control, and the task that felt heavy becomes lighter. Not because it's easier, but because your mind isn't stuck in resistance anymore. What made the 7-minute rule powerful wasn't the number. It was the permission. It gave me an exit from perfectionism. It gave me a way to start without committing to the finish. And it reminded me that progress isn't about how much you do. It's about how often you begin. The rule worked not because I suddenly became disciplined, but because I removed the friction that stopped me. I didn't have to win the whole war. I just had to take one step. That step created movement, and movement created belief. I'm not saying the 7-minute rule will solve everything, but it gave me the one thing I lacked: momentum. When you've been stuck, momentum is everything. And the way to build momentum isn't with giant efforts. It's with small, repeated starts. That's the gift of 7 minutes. It's not a hack, it's a door. And when you open that door, even a little, everything changes. In the next part, I'll explain why this rule works not just emotionally, but biologically. You'll learn how the brain reacts to low-effort activation, why our minds resist vague goals, and how using small-time commitments can rewire the way we think about effort, identity, and habit formation. But for now, remember this: the most important step is the one you're willing to take. And sometimes, all it takes is 7 minutes. At first glance, it might sound too simple to be effective. Just commit to 7 minutes? That can't possibly change anything. But the more I practiced the 7-minute rule, the more I began to realize it wasn't just a productivity trick. It was a neurological shift. What I had accidentally discovered was something behavioral psychologists have studied for decades: the power of small beginnings. You see, our brains aren't built for large, overwhelming goals. They're built to seek safety and avoid discomfort. When we think about tasks that feel heavy, cleaning the whole apartment, writing an entire essay, organizing years of files, our brain perceives threat. Not a life or death threat, of course, but a threat to comfort, energy, predictability. So it resists. That resistance often masquerades as laziness, but it's not. It's protection. Your mind is trying to shield you from what it sees as an energy-intensive event. And so you freeze, delay, distract. That's why traditional motivation doesn't work. You can hype yourself up all day, but the moment the task feels too big, your brain hits the brakes. But when you say, "I'll just do this for 7 minutes," the signal is different. It's no longer a threat. It's an invitation. It's light, brief, harmless. The brain says, "Sure, I can do that." And that's where everything begins. Because once you start, something remarkable happens. Your brain shifts into action mode. It moves from anticipation to engagement. You're no longer thinking about the task, you're doing it. And doing rewires everything. This is called behavioral activation. It's the same principle used in therapy to help people out of depression or apathy. Instead of waiting for motivation, you act first. And in acting, you generate momentum, clarity, and energy. Action fuels emotion, not the other way around. One of the most powerful studies on this principle comes from the world of behavioral economics. Researchers found that when people were asked to commit to a small action, like saving just $1 a day or walking for 5 minutes, they were far more likely to continue the behavior long-term than those who started with bigger commitments. The key wasn't the size of the action, it was the removal of friction. The brain doesn't want to leap, it wants to step. The 7-minute rule gives it that step. Another way to think of it is this. Imagine trying to push a heavy boulder. The hardest part is getting it to move. Once it's rolling, it takes far less energy to keep it going. That's what 7 minutes does. It gets the boulder moving. It breaks inertia. And inertia, once broken, often keeps rolling. I began to apply this not only to cleaning and writing, but also to areas I had never been consistent in, like exercise. I didn't say I'd do a full workout. I said, just stretch for 7 minutes. Sometimes that's all I did. But other times, I kept going because I was already moving. The key insight here is that consistency doesn't come from motivation. It comes from reducing the startup cost. If the cost, mental, emotional, physical, feels low, you'll do it. And once you've done it, you've already succeeded. Even if you stop after 7 minutes, you've reinforced the identity of someone who acts. That identity is powerful. It grows stronger every time you honor it. Every time you start, you cast a vote for the person you want to be. Over time, those votes build a new story about who you are. What I also discovered was that this practice silenced my inner critic. I used to feel shame for not doing enough, for not finishing, for not going all in. But with the 7-minute rule, the pressure to perform was gone. I only had to begin. And because I kept my promise, I started feeling proud. Not because of the result, but because of the follow-through. That sense of pride became addictive. I wasn't chasing productivity anymore. I was chasing integrity. That shift made me more resilient. I no longer dreaded big projects because I no longer needed to tackle them all at once. I trusted that I could chip away at anything, 7 minutes at a time. The sense of overwhelm diminished, and with it, my anxiety. The science behind this is supported by something called the Zeigarnik effect. It's the tendency for the brain to remember uncompleted tasks more vividly than completed ones. When you start something, even a little, the brain stays engaged. It wants to finish. That's why starting is so powerful. Once you begin, your brain keeps working, even in the background. It doesn't want to leave things hanging. This also explains why starting often leads to continuing. You don't need to force it. You've simply activated the loop. All you had to do was begin. Another concept that supports this is minimum viable effort. It's the smallest possible version of a task that still counts. For example, instead of reading a whole chapter, you read 1 page. Instead of meditating for 20 minutes, you sit in silence for 2. These micro actions are powerful because they remove resistance. They tell your brain, you can do this. And because they're so easy, you're more likely to repeat them. Repetition leads to habit, and habit, once formed, becomes identity. The beauty of the 7-minute rule is that it gives you a framework for minimum viable effort. It's short, it's defined, it feels like it matters, but it doesn't ask too much. And that's why it works. Especially for people like me. People who overthink, who freeze under pressure, who want to be better but don't know where to begin. 7 minutes is not a solution to everything, but it is a doorway. And once you step through that door, you're no longer stuck. You're in motion, and motion is everything. In the next part, I'll show how I built real systems using the 7-minute rule, how I turned scattered actions into structured routines, and how the consistency of small starts became the backbone of my productivity. You'll see how tiny rituals, repeated often, create big results. But for now, if you've been avoiding something, set a timer. 7 minutes, nothing more, and just begin. When I first started applying the 7-minute rule, it was an experiment, a way to break free from paralysis. But something unexpected happened. As I continued using it, those scattered efforts began to form structure. At first, I would only use it for isolated tasks. A bit of cleaning here, a short writing session there. But slowly, patterns started to emerge. I found myself doing certain actions around the same time each day. I noticed that I would often write for 7 minutes right after my morning coffee. I would stretch for 7 minutes after brushing my teeth. I would do a bit of digital organizing before shutting down my computer in the evening. What began as one-off attempts turned into tiny rituals. And that's when I realized the 7-minute rule wasn't just a way to start. It was a way to build systems. It became the invisible architecture of my day, not forced, not rigid, just consistent. The more I followed this pattern, the more momentum I gained. Not just in the individual habits, but in my overall sense of control and identity. I was no longer reacting to my day. I was shaping it, 7 minutes at a time. The key here was that I never sat down and built a master plan. I didn't draw out a perfect routine or download some productivity template. The systems I built were the result of doing small things repeatedly and noticing when they naturally fit together. I didn't try to overhaul my life. I just kept showing up for 7 minutes. And over time, those minutes connected. They formed grooves in my schedule, anchors in my behavior. I started to rely on them. They became familiar and automatic. It's the same way water carves stone, not with force, but with steady movement. And because these rituals were so low effort, they didn't trigger resistance. I didn't dread them. In fact, I began to enjoy them. There's something deeply satisfying about a ritual that you chose for yourself. One that's small, purposeful, and repeatable. The mistake many people make when trying to be more productive is that they aim too high, too fast. They want to go from chaos to perfect order in one leap. They build elaborate routines and then feel crushed when they can't maintain them. But sustainable systems aren't built on motivation. They're built on repetition. And repetition only works when the effort is small enough to repeat. That's what the 7-minute rule offered me. Repeatability. I could do it tired. I could do it on a busy day. I could do it when I didn't want to. 7 minutes was never too much. And because of that, I kept the chain alive. The system stayed intact. One of the most powerful examples of this was my relationship with writing. I used to struggle with consistency. I'd wait for inspiration, then try to write for hours in a frenzy. But that approach was unpredictable and exhausting. With the 7-minute rule, I stopped waiting for big blocks of time. I wrote for 7 minutes every morning. Sometimes I stopped after that. Often I didn't. But even on the days I wrote just one paragraph, I still felt like a writer. I had done my job. And that's when I understood something that changed everything. Your identity is shaped by your systems, not your goals, not your intentions, but by the structure of your days. Every 7-minute session was a vote for who I wanted to be. A writer, a person who finishes things, a person who shows up. This applied to my physical habits too. I used to tell myself I'd start working out when I had more time, more energy, a better plan. But that time never came. So I tried a different approach. I did 7 minutes of movement, some light stretching, a short walk, a few push-ups. That was it. No pressure, no tracking, just movement. And that movement, done consistently, built confidence. It wasn't long before I started looking forward to those 7 minutes. Then they turned into 10, then 20. Eventually, I built a full routine, but not because I forced it. It grew from something small and manageable. And because I started from a place of ease, I never burned out. I also began applying the rule to digital life. Each evening, before shutting down my laptop, I'd spend 7 minutes closing browser tabs, filing documents, or responding to quick messages. It was never a full cleanup, but it was enough to prevent digital chaos. That small ritual helped me end each workday with a sense of order. And that sense of order carried into the next day. It became a loop of positive reinforcement. Every time I completed a 7-minute task, I wasn't just doing the task, I was reinforcing the system. The behavior became more automatic. I started to think less and act more. And that's the beauty of systems built on small actions. They don't require much decision-making. You don't have to debate whether you're in the mood. You don't question if you have time. The structure is already in place. You just step into it. That's when behavior becomes habit, and habit becomes identity. These systems don't feel like discipline. They feel like rhythm. They don't create pressure. They create stability. What surprised me most was how these systems began to stack. I had 7-minute anchors throughout my day: morning writing, midday walk, evening digital reset. And those anchors gave shape to the rest of my time. They acted like bookmarks. They gave the day a beginning, middle, and end. I didn't plan for that to happen, but it did. Organically, through repetition, over time, I noticed that these systems created emotional benefits too. I felt calmer, less overwhelmed. I trusted myself more. I wasn't waiting for some future version of me to get it together. I was becoming that version, slowly and steadily. Not by changing everything, but by doing one small thing again and again. It's easy to underestimate the power of structure when you're used to chaos. But the truth is, systems aren't restrictive. They're liberating. When you don't have to constantly decide what to do or fight your own resistance, you're free to focus, free to create, free to live. The 7-minute rule gave me that freedom. It turned scattered actions into stable systems. It helped me stop waiting for the perfect moment and start building habits that actually fit my real life. In the next part, I'll go even deeper. I'll show how I use this framework not just to start things, but to track them, refine them, and stick with them long-term, even through setbacks and seasons of chaos. Because it's one thing to begin, it's another to endure. Starting was hard, but staying consistent, especially when life got messy, was even harder. That's where the next phase of the 7-minute rule revealed its deeper power. It wasn't just a way to begin. It became a way to keep going, even when everything else fell apart. Life, as we all know, is unpredictable. Some days are smooth and structured. Others are loud, chaotic, stressful, overwhelming. We get sick, we travel, we hit deadlines, we face emotional burnout. And in those seasons, most routines collapse. But 7 minutes? That always felt possible. And that's why I kept returning to it, even during the messiest chapters of my life. It wasn't about performance. It was about presence. The act of showing up, however briefly, was enough to hold the thread of consistency. That thread kept me grounded when everything else felt unstable. There were days I couldn't do a full workout, so I stretched for 7 minutes. Days when I couldn't focus on writing, so I jotted down a few ideas for 7 minutes. Days when I felt emotionally drained, so I journaled for 7 quiet minutes just to process. It was never about perfection. It was about rhythm. 7 minutes gave me just enough space to stay connected to who I wanted to be, even when the external world didn't cooperate. This became especially powerful when I hit a rough patch, professionally and emotionally. Deadlines were crashing. Personal relationships were strained. I felt overwhelmed and scattered. I could feel the old patterns creeping back in: avoidance, paralysis, guilt. But instead of letting everything go, I turned to the only thing that had ever helped me move through resistance: the rule. I told myself, whatever happens today, just find 7 minutes for something that matters. That tiny promise saved me. It was the lowest possible bar I could set and still feel like I was honoring my process. 7 minutes of order in a day of chaos. 7 minutes of clarity in a mind full of noise. 7 minutes of control when everything else felt uncertain. And the truth is, those short bursts didn't just keep me afloat. They kept me in motion. I didn't lose all my progress. I didn't abandon my identity. I didn't have to start over again. I was still, in some small way, moving forward. And that made all the difference. There's a dangerous myth in personal growth. The idea that consistency means doing things exactly the same way every single day, no matter what. But that's not realistic. And worse, it sets us up for shame when life interrupts. The beauty of the 7-minute rule is that it's flexible by design. It doesn't demand perfect form, full energy, or maximum output. It just asks for presence. It gives you permission to scale down without quitting, to adjust without abandoning. And in that flexibility lies sustainability. I realized that long-term success isn't about doing the most every day. It's about doing something every day, no matter how small. That something becomes your anchor. It keeps the habit alive. It tells your brain, we're still doing this, even if it looks different than yesterday. This mindset became the foundation of my self-discipline. I stopped expecting ideal conditions. I stopped aiming for streaks. I stopped punishing myself for not being perfect. Instead, I focused on resilience, on returning, on respecting the season I was in. If I was sick, I still read for 7 minutes. If I was busy, I still wrote 1 sentence. If I was sad, I still moved my body gently. And because the rule was so forgiving, I never felt like I'd failed. I always felt like I was still participating. And that consistency, rooted in compassion, not punishment, created emotional momentum. It helped me rebuild confidence in moments when I felt small. It reminded me that progress doesn't die when perfection disappears. It only dies when we give up. 7 minutes helped me never give up. Another surprising benefit was how the rule protected me from burnout. In the past, when I was feeling motivated, I'd do too much, too fast. I'd stack new habits, overload my calendar, push through exhaustion, all in the name of consistency. But then I'd crash. The 7-minute rule saved me from that cycle. It reminded me that small actions are not weak. They're wise. That sustainability beats intensity. That you can go far if you go gently and steadily. And so I slowed down. I started listening to my energy instead of overriding it. I allowed myself to be human, not a machine. And yet, I made more progress than ever before. Not because I was working harder, but because I was working smarter. The consistency wasn't in the output, it was in the return. Every day, I returned to something. A word, a breath, a movement, a practice. 7 minutes was the bridge between effort and endurance. Eventually, this rhythm became second nature. I didn't have to think about it. I didn't have to negotiate with myself. I didn't dread it. I just did it. It became part of the way I lived, like brushing my teeth or making my bed. But more than that, it became part of who I was. Someone who kept going. Someone who didn't disappear when things got hard. Someone who stayed connected, even when life got loud. And all of that started, not with a grand routine or massive discipline, but with a small, quiet promise. Just 7 minutes. Looking back, I realize now that the true power of this rule isn't in its length. It's in its meaning. It's a signal to your brain that you are still in motion. It's a symbol of commitment without pressure. It's a gesture of care toward your future self. When life is heavy, 7 minutes is a light you can carry. When everything feels out of control, it's something you can control. And that kind of control, the gentle kind, the kind rooted in choice, is more powerful than all the productivity hacks in the world. In the next part, I'll share how this mindset began to shape not just my habits, but my identity, my relationships, and my self-worth. Because when you learn how to keep promises to yourself, even small ones, you begin to see yourself differently. You begin to believe in your own consistency. You begin to trust your own word. And that, more than anything, is how real change begins. When I look back now, I realize that the 7-minute rule didn't just help me build better habits or improve my productivity. It reshaped how I saw myself. It changed my identity. Before this rule, I believed I was someone who couldn't stick to anything. Someone who made plans and then abandoned them. Someone who started strong and fizzled out. That belief wasn't just frustrating, it was painful. It made me doubt myself, made me feel like I lacked something fundamental. But when I started showing up, 7 minutes at a time, that belief began to crack. Every short burst of effort chipped away at the old story I'd told myself. And slowly, a new story emerged. I was someone who could be trusted with small promises. I was someone who showed up, not just when it was easy or exciting, but also when it was inconvenient, boring, or hard. And that new identity didn't just change what I did, it changed what I believed I was capable of. Identity is powerful. It drives action. It reinforces or sabotages behavior. When you believe you are the kind of person who follows through, your brain begins to search for ways to stay aligned with that identity. It makes you more consistent, more confident, more resilient. But that identity doesn't just appear, it's built. And it's built through action. Not massive action, not perfect action, just small, repeated acts that stack up over time. That's what the 7-minute rule gave me, a structure for identity change. It made consistency feel attainable. It made follow-through feel safe. It made momentum feel personal. And once that shift took hold, the changes didn't stop at tasks or routines. They seeped into other parts of my life. My relationships, for example, began to change. I became more reliable. I called people back. I followed up on things I said I'd do. Not always perfectly, but consistently. That consistency created trust, and that trust deepened my connections. I also became more honest with myself. When I felt resistance, instead of hiding from it, I acknowledged it. I didn't judge it. I simply said, "What's the smallest step I can take right now?" That question became a daily compass. It led me through stress, through burnout, through sadness, through doubt, because the smallest step was always available, always doable, always within reach. And perhaps the most beautiful part of this transformation was that I no longer needed to feel inspired to act. I didn't wait for clarity. I didn't chase motivation. I just showed up, 7 minutes at a time. The discipline grew roots, the habits grew stronger, and the identity, it became unshakable. I wasn't perfect, and I never tried to be, but I was steady. And in a world that constantly pulls us in 100 directions, being steady is a superpower. That steadiness spilled over into creative work. I created more. Not because I was working harder, but because I was working regularly. I didn't rely on bursts of inspiration. I relied on systems. I had learned that inspiration often follows action, not the other way around. The 7-minute rule had trained me to begin, and beginning had opened the door to flow. Even my relationship with failure began to change. I used to see failure as proof that I wasn't good enough, that I couldn't follow through. But now, Failure just meant I'd missed a day, nothing more. I didn't spiral, I just reset. Because when your bar is 7 minutes, it's never too hard to return. There's no shame, no guilt, just a gentle nudge back to rhythm. I no longer saw setbacks as permanent. I saw them as part of the process. That mindset changed everything. It made me more patient, more kind to myself. And ironically, that self-kindness made me more productive, not less. Because when you're not constantly fighting your inner critic, you have more energy to do what matters. People began to ask me, "How are you so consistent?" And I'd tell them the truth. I'm not always consistent, but I always return. And I never underestimate what 7 minutes can do. They thought it was a gimmick at first, until they tried it. And they discovered the same thing I did. That momentum is always waiting on the other side of a small start. That action is easier than overthinking. That progress doesn't require perfection. It requires presence. I used to chase big change. I wanted transformation, reinvention. But I've come to believe that the most meaningful change is quiet. It's built in the margins of the day. In those few minutes, you could have scrolled or zoned out or said, "I'll do it tomorrow." But instead, you chose to act. You chose to become. The 7-minute rule didn't just help me do more. It helped me become more honest, more grounded, more free. And the best part is, anyone can do this. You don't need a program. You don't need fancy tools. You just need a timer and a willingness to begin. So here's my invitation to you. Think of one thing you've been avoiding. Just one. Something that lingers in the back of your mind. Maybe it's something small, like replying to emails, cleaning your room, or going for a walk. Or maybe it's something big, like writing that book, learning that skill, rebuilding your confidence. Now ask yourself, what would happen if I did this for just 7 minutes today? That's all. Not to finish it, not to master it, just to begin. Set the timer. Let go of the outcome and take the smallest possible step. Because in that small step lies all the power you've been looking for. I won't promise that 7 minutes will fix everything. But I will say this. It's enough to move you forward. It's enough to shift your state. It's enough to keep the promise. And over time, those promises add up. They build character. They build belief. They build momentum. 7 minutes at a time. That's how you build a life you're proud of. That's how you become someone who shows up. And that's how you change. Gently, quietly, and for good.